Hi everyone, our presentation will consist of Chapter 6, The Self, which involves the mind, gender, and body, and its internal influences on consumer behavior.
Presenting on Chapter 6 will be Helen, Joanna, Samantha, and Kira. So here's the agenda that we have set up for the presentation. We will be talking about the self, if the self exists, identity, are we what we buy, the extended self, embodied recognition and the digital self, gender identity, sex role socialization, gender identity versus sexual identity, sex-typed products, the body, what is beauty, ideals of female and male beauty, body decoration and mutilation, surgery, tattoos, and piercing. Here are some of the objectives that we plan on accomplishing during this presentation. Understanding how self-concept strongly influences consumer behavior, why products define a person's self-concept, how gender identity is an important component of a consumer's self-concept, why the way we think about our bodies is a major influence of self-esteem, how culture dictates body decoration or mutilation.
When talking about the self, by definition, it's a person's essential being that distinguishes them from others. And many individuals feel as though their personal or physical appearance affect their value as a person. So it's important to know that we choose many products because we either want to highlight or even hide some aspect of ourselves that we're not too happy about. And our feelings as consumers shape a lot of our consumption practices because we want to fulfill society's expectations about how men and women should look and act. Two perfect examples that I saw was number one, where the man is getting a haircut and his beard trims by his barber because ultimately he might possibly believe that men who are considered attractive are well-groomed. And the second example was for the woman, and you can see that she is applying makeup because it's a stereotype, and we're constantly surrounded by ads, articles, photos, or even social media showing attractive models looking a certain way. As consumers, we should definitely ask ourselves if the self exists. Nowadays, we live in a society where there's so much social media applications where we can easily communicate or expose ourselves by enabling everyone to focus on himself or herself by sharing great amount of details about their lives with anyone who may seem interested. It can be strangers, family, friends, and so forth. So we all have something in common, which is called the collective self, and this is where a person derives his or her identity in a large measure from a social group. So I want to talk about Eastern and Western cultures versus non-Western cultures, and a big difference that each of them have is that Eastern and Western cultures believe that self divides into an inner private self and an outer public self. So when comparing with non-Western cultures, they tend to focus on an interdependent self where we define our identities largely by the relationships that we have with others. This is really important to know because you can see how the cultures differ in terms of which part they see as the real you. Lastly, I'm going to be talking about identity and how it relates to self-concept. So the self-concept is defined as the beliefs a person holds about his or her own attributes and how he or she evaluates the self on these qualities. So each element that contributes to our self-concept is ultimately a identity. And an identity can be any category label or something that a consumer self-associates themselves that may show a clear picture of what a person in that category looks like, thinks like, feels, and does. So examples that I can think of are a mother, a college student, a Prius driver, a humanitarian, and so forth. So those are all identities that people can associate themselves with. And marketers try to understand certain identities to develop products and messages that meet the needs of people who link themselves to a given identity. Another example of this is that the same Prius driver is most likely a person who sees themselves as a environmentally responsible person, and knowing this information will be helpful to a marketer because they will know that green products are more likely to get that person's attention.
Are we what we buy? Some psychologists suggest that we choose products when their attributes match some aspect of our self, which is known as the self-image congruence model. So when we're choosing a product that's aesthetically pleasing, this might make us feel better about ourselves, because if we're buying something that looks nice, that might mean that we look nice, or it's making us look nicer. And over time, consumers tend to form relationships with products that actually resemble bonds that they share with people. So they can have emotional connections with their favorite brands that make them defensive over them, but they can also lead them to have breakups with a brand that'll make them go to great lengths to discredit it. So they're bad-mouthing it to friends and family or leaving bad reviews on Yelp. A lot of times, though, too, consumers' possessions will place him or her into a social role, which help them to answer the question of, who am I now? So they could be purchasing products that they expect those products to help fulfill their perceived self to society, or who they want to be perceived as. And we can actually infer about a consumer's personality even just by looking at the products that they're purchasing. So for example, if we look at the slide here, we can see a picture of a living room. And just by looking at this living room, we might infer that the person living there is clean, organized, sophisticated, and even welcoming to the guests that they're about to have. And not only do consumers use products to fulfill a social role, but they actually attach themselves to objects to the extent that they rely on them to maintain their self-concept. And so basically they're using objects to act as security blankets to reinforce their identities, particularly in situations that they're unfamiliar with. So for example, if you're a freshman in college living on campus for the first time, you might decorate your dorm with personal pictures and decorations that just help remind you of who you are. Now, in some cases, though, people don't have complete self-definitions, and these people tend to complete their identities when they acquire and display symbols that they associate with the roles that they're trying to obtain. And this is known as the symbolic self-completion theory. Now, for example, adolescent boys might use macho products like cars, to bolster developing masculinity. Now, although there are products that we help self-identify or use for social roles, there are also external objects that we consider to be a part of us, and this is known as our extended self. So with the extended self, there's 4 levels, and that includes the individual level, family level, community level, and the group level. So our individual level is the biggest one. It is our personal possessions that we use to help self-define ourselves, and this can be from jewelry, cars, or clothing, etc. And for example, looking at the picture on the slide here, we have some shoes that look like faces, and what this company is trying to do with this ad is basically portraying the fact that we are what we wear. So the shoes that we wear just portray who we are. And the next level of our extended self is our family level. And this basically includes our house, and the furnishings that we have in it. And so when referring to about who we are, we might think of where we're living. And next we have the community level. And this is common for consumers to describe themselves in terms of the neighborhood or the town in which they came. So when they're describing who they are, they might consider a big part of who they are to be where they're from or where they grew up. And lastly is the group level, and this is in regards of the attachments to certain social groups as a part of who we are. And a big one for this one is sports teams. So we might say, oh, I'm a fan of the Lakers, and that might be a big part of who we are actually. Even though the products that we purchase are a great influence about how we identify ourselves, it can even be just between our thoughts and behaviors. And this relationship is known as embodied cognition. And it basically, the states of the body can modify the states of our minds. So with body language, that can change how we see ourselves. For example, with power posing, if we're standing in a confident way, even if we don't feel confident, that might eventually make us feel confident just from behaving like it'll change how we're feeling. However, we can also use clothing to change how we're behaving, which is known as enclothed cognition. So, for example, in the book, it explains how people who wore lab coats displayed enhanced performances on tasks, but as soon as they were told that it was a painter's coat and not a lab coat, their performance immediately declined. Furthermore, another really big aspect, especially in today's society, is our digital self, and this is just the element of self-expression that relates to a person's online identity. And this can be from strategically modifying profile pictures or the descriptions that we share in biographies on our social media sites so we can try to come across a certain way online. But a lot of times, though, we take these pieces of our digital identities back with us to the physical world. So let's say someone's trying to come across as very adventurous online, but they're not actually in real life. They might start acting like they are. They might go on more hikes or more road trips just so that they can become who they want to be perceived as their online persona. And in today's society, with our technological advancements, we now have wearable computing, which are digital interactions attached to our bodies, which is most commonly seen in Apple Watches. So we're always refreshing our social media sites, always posting, always keeping our digital personas updated. But not only do we try to change who we are, like our personality online and who we're trying to be perceived as, but we can use apps like virtual makeovers such as Facetune that allow us to alter the way that we look physically. So this really overall enhances the idea of a digital identity where a consumer can alter the way that they are perceived personality-wise and the way that they are perceived physically.
Gender identity is an important component of a consumer's self-concept. People often conform to their culture's expectations about how those of their gender should act, dress, or speak, and we refer to these set of expectations as sex roles. Of course, these guidelines change over time and they differ radically across different societies and cultures. In India, for example, a society communicates its assumptions about the proper roles of men and women as it defines ideal behaviors for each gender. For example, the Indian government banned a TV ad for Axe men's deodorant. It's because the ad shows a man who turns into a walking chocolate figure as he sprays himself with the brand's Dark Temptation deodorant. As he walks through the city, women throw themselves at him and they lick and bite off various parts of his body. Although the same ad played in Argentina and Europe without any problem, traditional Indian culture does not approve of this imagery, and therefore the government yanked the ad. It's not clear to what extent gender differences are innate rather than culturally shaped, but they're certainly evident in many consumption situations. Consider the way that we consume food. Women tend to eat more fruit, whereas men are more likely to eat meat. That is because consumers do tend to view meat as a more masculine product. As well as consider the way that we eat in terms of quantity. Women tend to eat on the lighter side, whereas men feel like they need to fill up because they need to eat like a man. Sex role socialization. Children pick up on the concept of gender identity at an earlier age. Gender socialization is the process by which individuals are informed about the norms and behaviors associated with their assigned sex, usually during childhood development. For example, by the age of 3, most U.S. children categorize driving a truck as masculine and cooking and cleaning as feminine. Even characters that cartoons portray help shape the way that boys and girls view males and females. Another example is Rate My Professor. We students use Rate My Professor all the time when trying to figure out our schedules to see if that professor is good or not. Well, did you ever notice the way that words are used to describe male and female professors? Male professors are most likely to have words describing them as smart and genius, whereas female professors have words describing them as bossy, demanding, or maybe even nurturing. But this just shows that the way that we use language and words to describe males and females is much more different than we realize. Marketers tend to reinforce cultural expectations regarding the correct way for boys and girls, men and women to look and act. Many societies expect males to pursue agentic goals, which stress self-assertion and mastery. However, they teach females to value communal goals, such as affiliation and building harmonious relations. That is why typically you see the man as the one with the job going after the money, whereas the woman is the one that stays at home, takes care of the children, and takes care of the house. A recent comprehensive review of the research literature reported 5 basic conclusions about gender differences. The first being that males are more self-oriented, whereas females are more other-oriented. The second, females are more cautious responders. Third, females are more responsive to negative data. Fourth, males process data more selectively and females more comprehensively. And fifth, females are more sensitive to differentiating conditions and factors. Gender identity versus sexual identity. Gender role identity is a state of mind as well as body. A person's biological gender does not totally determine whether he or she will exhibit sex-type traits, which are characteristics we stereotypically associate with one gender or the other. A consumer's subjective feelings about his or her sexuality are crucial as well. Therefore, new evidence is emerging about the effects of biology on consumer behavior. Neuroendocrinological science focuses on the potential role of hormonal influences on preferences for different kinds of products or people. For example, women who are at peak fertility are attracted to men who display evidence of higher levels of testosterone. These women are more likely to attend social events and even dress sexier to attract men's attention. Masculinity and femininity are not biological characteristics. A behavior that one culture considers to be masculine might get a different response in another. For example, the way that the United States male friends and Latin or European cultural male friends, how they embrace each other. So, it is common for males in Latin and European cultures to hug and kiss one another as a form of greeting. However, in the United States, male friends tend to not do that, although there is the acceptance of the bromance, which is the affection between straight male friends. Sex-type products. Many products are intimately associated with one gender or the other, especially if they link to a culture's definition of what is sexually appealing. Sex-type products reflect stereotypical masculine or feminine attributes, and consumers associate them with one gender or another. In regards to female sex roles, today the evolution of a new managerial class of women has forced marketers to change their traditional assumptions about women as they target this growing market. Although there are still traditional sex role stereotypes for women. Take the Middle East, for example, where women tend to cover up to be more conservative, whereas American women tend to be more loud. To further complicate matters, sex roles constantly evolve. In a complex society like ours, we often encounter contradictory messages about appropriate behavior, and we may find ourselves putting on a different face as we jump from situation to situation. For example, the contemporary young mainstream female achievers, CYMFA, identify different roles these women play in different contexts. For example, as a mother or partner, they enact a highly feminine role. As a tough business person, they play a masculine role, and with a friend, they might evoke both roles at once. In regards to male sex roles, our culture's stereotype of the ideal male is tough, aggressive, muscular, and someone who enjoys sports. Advertising in male magazines with male readership shows ads that contribute to the image of hypermasculinity because of the emphasis on violence, dangerousness, and callous attitudes towards women and sex. Masculinism is the male image and the complex cultural meanings of masculinity. There's 3 models of masculinity: the breadwinner, the rebel, and the man of action hero. The breadwinner model draws from the U.S. myth of success and celebrates respectability, civic virtues, pursuit of material success, and organized achievement. The rebel model, on the other hand, emphasizes rebellion, independence, adventure, and potency. The man of action hero is a synthesis that draws from the best of the 2 models. Androgyny refers to the possession of both masculine and feminine traits. There is a distinction between sex-type people, who are stereotypically masculine or feminine, and androgynous people, whose orientation isn't as clearly defined. Androgyny can open new markets if marketers can expand the reach of their target audience. For example, a British department store known as Selfridges did a movement to feature unisex fashion lines and put mannequins in storage to show the collections in a non-gender specific way. One possible motivation for the experiment is that the store finds that more female shoppers are buying menswear for themselves, and it now wants to encourage men to be adventurous about crossing to the other side of the aisle as well. Another term is also gender-bending products, which are traditionally sex-type items adapted to the opposite gender. For example, a gender-bending product is Old Spice has long been known as the brand dads keep in their medicine cabinet, but young women who like the scent and the relatively low price are tuning into the deodorant as well. This resurgence is a bit ironic because the first product the company introduced in 1937 was a woman's fragrance. LGBT consumers. Gay relationships are increasingly becoming more mainstream as in parts of the US. Therefore, there are more marketing communications that include gay couples. But lately, the cultural spotlight has been on transgender people, helped along by the media, such as Bruce Jenner's transition to Caitlyn Jenner on the cover of Vogue. The definitions of gender continues to evolve as a global third gender movement picks up steam. The third gender movement is the concept in which individuals are categorized either by themselves or by society as neither a man or a woman. There's also the category of intersex children, who are those born with both genitalia or ambiguous sex characteristics. With LGBT consumers becoming more mainstream, there's even more marketing opportunity for marketers to cater towards this community.
Moving on to the last section of this chapter, the body. Nowadays, appearance is everything. We all know that deep down we care about how we present ourselves to the world. Do we fit in? Do we not? The way we think about our bodies and the way our culture tells us we should think is a key component of our self-esteem. It all begins with our body image. Body image is a consumer's subjective evaluation of his or her physical self. Because it is based off a self-evaluation, we may think we are fat, buff, or even ugly. Our perception of ourselves begin to develop insecurities that some marketers try to prey on. It's not a nice tactic, but it works. Our ideal of beauty is skewed or biased to what we compare ourselves to. It could be a particular model or a bodybuilder on Instagram. These ideals all correspond to the ideal our culture currently values. For example, the Kardashians. So many women are aiming for the hourglass figure with a big butt because Kim, Khloe, Kylie, and Kourtney set the trend. Our IG inspirations cause so many women to follow in their footsteps, only to realize that they have changed their physical features to fit in. In the past, beauty wasn't defined through an hourglass figure, but an 18-inch waist or bounded feet. How and why were they considered an ideal? I'm not sure, but others thought they were. As we say, beauty is pain. An 18-inch waist? That's insane. In order to attain that, some bones were broken, shortness of breath increased, and spinal disorders surfaced. There are some consequences that come with attaining beauty, such as bounded feet that originated in China. That practice eventually got banned due to deaths of young women who couldn't support the pain or infections that it came with. So far, in the modern society, most people sacrifice their mental and physical health for a desirable body. With the convenience of social media being at the tip of their fingers, we compare ourselves so much to the point where some have fallen victim to disorders such as anorexia and bulimia. People, especially women, perceive themselves to be too fat and starve themselves or purge themselves in their quest for thinness. On the opposite spectrum, there are women who feel alienated from society because of the lack of representation they receive. Fashionistas are plus-size consumers who demand more options from mainstream fashion marketers. Lately, plus-size models are breaking the internet by showing that they are comfortable in their own skin. That is the power of social media for you. Find people who can relate and gain their support. Moving on to the ideals of men. Facial hair. It has gone in and out of its phase, and right now it's back again. A beard and a man bun? Great combo. Men have their ideals too, and that so happened to be one of them. The typical features of a man that everyone strives for is a well-built, muscular physique. That's why most advertisements feature an ideal most men wish to attain, a strong build. Yet, women actually tend to prefer men with less muscle mass than men themselves strive to achieve. Luckily, there are other ways to achieve a great-looking body. Body decoration and mutilation. Why? What's the purpose for practicing this? Well, here are the reasons. Number 1, to separate group members from non-members, such as adults versus young ones. 2, to place the individual in the social organization, such as a rite, which is a religious or other solemn ceremony or act. 3. To place the person in a gender category. For example, lipstick enhances femininity. 4. To enhance sex role identification. This would include high heels or foot binding. 5. To indicate desired social conduct. For example, some gay men wear an earring on their left or right ear to signal what role they prefer in a relationship. 6. To indicate high status or ranking, such as wearing fake glasses to appear smarter. 7. To provide a sense of security, such as wearing amulets or lucky charms. Our mental bodies play such a huge role in our mental health. These days, a person's worst nightmare could be seeing a gap between their real and ideal physical selves on a social media post. This can also be called body anxiety. Body anxiety will make people go to great lengths to change aspects of their appearance, such as going to tanning salons, drinking kombucha, or putting on a ton of makeup on their face just to change up their appearance. Cosmetic surgery is increasing due to the consumer's desire to change or enhance their appearance. Medical tourism is a growing sector of the global economy that encourages consumers to travel for surgical procedures. For example, South Korea provides double eyelids for monolids, so anyone could go ahead and travel to South Korea to get a double eye lift if they want. In modern society, tattoos have become another way for people to express an adventurous side of themselves. Although sometimes it could lead to regret, people usually get tattoos to give off a new sense of self through body decoration or mutilation. Piercings, like tattoos, actually evolved from association with non-mainstream into a fashion statement. So navel piercing, tongue piercings, tattoos on their back, a whole sleeve. Nowadays, it's just for popular fashion. And now, passing it over to Helen for the summary.
In summary, a consumer's self-concepts are reflections of their attitudes towards themselves. Whether it's positive or negative, they will help guide many purchase decisions because we choose products based on how similar they are to our personalities. The symbolic interactionist perspective implies that each of us have many selves and we require a different set of products as props to play each role. We also view many things other than the body as part of who we are. And people use valued objects, cars, homes, and even attachments to sports teams or national monuments to define the self when they incorporate these into the extended self.
Sex roles, or a society's conceptions about masculinity and femininity, are a powerful influence on our expectations about the brands we should consume. Advertising plays an important role because it portrays idealized expectations about gender identity.
Here are a few things that you should remember when it comes to the body. The culture usually communicates specific ideals of beauty, and consumers go to great lengths to attain these. Many consumer activities involve manipulating the body, whether through dieting, cosmetic surgery, piercing, or tattooing. Sometimes these activities are carried to an extreme because people try too hard to live up to the cultural ideals. Body decoration or mutilation may serve such functions as separating group members from non-members, marking the individual's status or rank within a social organization or within a gender category, or even providing a sense of security or good luck. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.